"You're trespassing on private property." That was the first thing she said to me, standing in my driveway, hands on her hips like she owned the whole mountain. A white Range Rover idled behind her, blocking the road with a steel chain and a shiny sign that read, "Private Community." I stared at her, the smell of her designer perfume cutting through the pine air. My boots crunched on the gravel that my great-grandfather had laid down a century ago, but according to this woman, I was the intruder. "This cabin up there," I said, pointing past her shoulder. "That's mine. My family built it. You're standing on my land." Her smirk could have frozen lava. "Not anymore. The Homeowners Association now has rules, and you, sir, violate all of them," clipboard in her hand. Sunglasses perched like a crown, every word dripping with arrogance. I wanted to laugh, but instead I let the silence drag. Let her believe for a few seconds she was in control because the truth I was holding back would cut the ground out from under her perfect little shoes. She didn't know. None of them knew. The mansions, the manicured lawns, the people sipping wine on decks that didn't belong to them. They were all standing on something that belonged to me. And when I showed them proof, their empire would collapse overnight. She thought she was shutting me out. What she didn't realize was I held the keys to the entire valley. I stepped around her chain without a word. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't move. Gravel cracked under my boots, every step up that road louder than her little clipboard authority. The cabin came into view, half hidden by trees, weathered but unbroken. Cedar logs dark with age, chimney still standing proud. My great-grandfather built it to last, and it had outlived every storm this mountain threw at it. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like they remembered me. Inside, the air smelled of dust and pine smoke. Shadows stretched across the floor where the fire once burned. My mother's rocking chair sat in the corner, still facing the window with the best view of the valley. But that view was different now. The meadows were gone. In their place, green lawns trimmed like carpet squares, sprinklers hissing where wildflowers once grew. 8 mansions, all glass and chrome, crowd the valley like invaders, and every single one sat on land my family never sold. A paper envelope slid from under the cabin door. I bent down, picked it up. HOA letterhead, thick as a brick. Page after page of violations. Roof color, firewood stacks, even the outhouse my great-grandfather dug by hand. $73,000 in fines. 500 more for every day I didn't comply. My hands shook, not from fear, but fury. They thought paper could scare me off this mountain, but I wasn't planning to run. I was planning to fight. The next morning, my mailbox looked like it had been stuffed by a paper bomb. 14 envelopes, each stamped with that smug HOA seal, violation notices, one after another. Non-compliant roof color, unauthorized outbuilding, improper vehicle storage, landscaping violations. I actually laughed when I read that last one. Landscaping violations, because the wildflowers my family protected for nearly a century weren't on their approved plant list. But the laugh didn't last long. Every violation carried a $500 fine, daily penalties until corrected. Their numbers stacked higher than the ridges around the valley. I spread the papers across my kitchen table. It didn't look like legal paperwork. It looked like an ambush, a trap disguised as community rules. They weren't just trying to bankrupt me. They wanted to erase me, wipe out my family's legacy and replace it with cookie-cutter mansions and manicured lawns. I stood at the window, staring down into the valley. Those houses glittered in the sun like trophies. But underneath the shine, I saw the truth. Desperation. They needed me gone, and desperate people make mistakes. I gathered the papers into a neat pile, shoved them back into the envelope, and tossed it on the table. If they thought they could bury me in bureaucracy, they'd picked the wrong man. I'd spent my life in oil fields and courtrooms. This was just another kind of fight. They thought I'd fold under their paperwork, but I was about to show them what happens when you corner a man with nothing left to lose. On the porch when I heard them coming. 3 SUVs are crawling up my driveway like an invasion force. Doors slammed. Out stepped 4 people in matching outfits, khakis, vests, and clipboards tucked under their arms like weapons. And leading the charge? Her. Same smirk, same perfume, same Range Rover parked sideways like a barricade. "Good morning, Mr. Forrester," she called, sugary sweet. We're here for your mandatory compliance inspection. I didn't move. Just sipped my coffee. Funny, I said. I don't remember inviting company. She waved her papers in the air. Section 4.7 of the community bylaws gives us full authority to inspect all properties. One of her goons lifted a camera and started snapping photos of everything. My porch, my truck, even the firewood stacked by the cabin wall. Another one muttered about aesthetic violations. I set my cup down slowly, stood up. Ma'am, this is private property. You weren't invited, and you don't have permission to turn my home into your photo shoot. Her smile tightened, all teeth now. You'll regret this attitude. People who don't respect community standards usually learn the hard way. She herded her little squad back to their cars. Cameras still flashing, voices clipped and sharp. As her Range Rover rolled down the hill, I caught her parting glance in the rearview mirror, and it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. They thought they'd rattled me. What they didn't know was that their little show had just given me the excuse to hit back harder than they ever expected. The next day, I drove into town and came back with a box of trail cameras, motion sensors, night vision, audio recording, 6 units in all. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd drag their little operation into the light. I nailed one high in the pines above the driveway, another by the woodpile, 2 more near the outhouse and root cellar. Every corner of my land now had eyes. 48 hours later, the cameras caught gold. At dawn, 3 figures crept up my property line, whispering like kids sneaking into a movie theater. Except these weren't kids. They were the same clipboard warriors from the inspection squad led by her. Dressed in black, cameras out, snapping photos of every crack, every log, every inch of my cabin, and the audio, crystal clear. We need more violations, one muttered. Pile them up, she hissed. The faster we break him, the faster he sells. They weren't inspecting. They were trespassing, plotting, setting up a paper noose they thought I'd hang myself with. I copied the footage, tucked the USB into my desk drawer, and sat back with a grin for the first time all week. They thought I was the target, but they'd just turned themselves into evidence, and the longer they played their game, the deeper they dug their own grave. They believed they were cornering me. But the cameras had flipped the next day. I drove into town and came back with a box of trail cameras, motion sensors, night vision, audio recording, 6 units in all. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd drag their little operation into the light. I nailed one high in the pines above the driveway, another by the woodpile, 2 more near the outhouse and root cellar. Every corner of my land now had eyes. 48 hours later, the cameras caught gold. At dawn, 3 figures crept up my property line, whispering like kids sneaking into a movie theater. Except these weren't kids. They were the same clipboard warriors from the inspection squad led by her. Dressed in black, cameras out, snapping photos of every crack, every log, every inch of my cabin, and the audio, crystal clear. We need more violations, one muttered. Pile them up, she hissed. The faster we break him, the faster he sells. They weren't inspecting. They were trespassing, plotting, setting up a paper noose they thought I'd hang myself with. I copied the footage, tucked the USB into my desk drawer, and sat back with a grin for the first time all week. They thought I was the target, but they'd just turned themselves into evidence, and the longer they played their game, the deeper they dug their own grave. They believed they were cornering me, but the cameras had flipped the hunt. Now I was stalking them. 2 days later, the quiet of the mountain was shattered again. This time it wasn't SUVs. It was a parade. A county health truck, a building inspector's sedan, and behind them a news van. And of course, her white Range Rover leading the convoy like a general marching to war. They piled out onto my driveway, clipboards and cameras ready. The reporter shoved a mic in my face before I'd even stood up from the porch chair. Sir, we've received multiple complaints about hazardous living conditions on this property. How do you respond? I set my coffee down slowly. Hazardous? I repeated. That's a new one. Vivian, that's what I'd learned her name was, stepped forward. Crocodile smile plastered on. We're simply protecting the community. Your septic system, your structures, even your firewood pile. All potential violations. The inspector poked around my cabin and the health guy tested the soil. Cameras clicked, and the reporter whispered dramatic lines. It was all theater, except the test came back spotless. Septic? Cleaner than most new builds. Foundation? Rock solid. Water? Pure. The inspector shook his head. There's nothing wrong here. That's when I pulled out my phone, flipped it around, and showed the reporter a screenshot. Trail cam footage of Vivian and her squad sneaking around at dawn. Their voices clear as day, plotting false reports. The reporter's eyes widened. Vivian's smile cracked. For the first time, she looked rattled. She thought she'd staged my downfall. She didn't realize she'd just walked straight into her own exposure. The next morning, I woke to silence. No hum from the fridge. No click from the heater. My cabin was dead quiet. Power gone. At first, I thought storm damage. But the sky was clear. I called the electric company, and the automated message nearly made me laugh out loud. Service temporarily suspended due to reported safety violations. Reconnection requires HOA approval. HOA approval. For my own damn electricity. By noon, a courier in a suit trudged up the drive, handed me a thick envelope, and scurried off like he'd delivered poison. Inside? 47 pages of legal threats. The letter claimed my non-compliance was damaging property values, costing the HOA millions. Demanded I pay $250,000 in damages, or face a lawsuit that would ruin me financially. I flipped through page after page, my jaw tight. Every word reeked of intimidation. Every number was designed to scare, but then I spotted something, a date. They claimed I'd been causing damage since January 1st. Funny thing was, I hadn't even been back in Colorado until March. Their whole case was built on lies. Sloppy lies. I tossed the packet onto the table, grabbed a pen, and started a new list. Not of violations, but of their mistakes. Every false claim, every trespass, every shred of evidence I'd already collected. They thought cutting my power would break me. What they didn't know was I was about to flip the switch on the one thing they'd never control. I drove straight to the county courthouse, legal packet under my arm. If they wanted war, I needed ammo. Jolene, the clerk who'd known my family since before I was born, met me at the records desk. "Deck," she said, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, honey. They've been filing complaints left and right." "Let's see the deeds," I said. We pulled the old homestead records, yellowed pages stamped with federal seals. My great-grandfather's signature is still sharp as a knife stroke. The more I read, the slower my pulse beat, until one line nearly knocked the breath out of me. Mineral rights. Not just under the cabin. Not just the 80 acres around it. The entire valley floor, every ridge line, every foundation those glass mansions were built on. And not just ownership. Perpetual access. Which meant if I wanted to dig under their driveways, lay pipelines beneath their manicured lawns, or tap the veins of rare earth that ran under their designer kitchens. I had the legal right. I leaned back in the wooden chair, papers spread before me like treasure maps. For years, I thought my family's legacy was just this cabin. Turns out they'd left me the ground under everyone else's feet. Vivian wasn't the queen of this valley. She was just a squatter sitting on top of a gold mine I already owned. She thought she had me cornered with fines and lawsuits. But I was about to show her. I held the mountain itself in my hands. I carried the mineral rights papers straight to a lawyer in Colorado Springs, Roxanne Blackwood. No nonsense, sharp eyes, the kind of attorney who looked like she chewed up bullies for breakfast. She spread the documents across her desk, scanning fast. Then she looked up at me with a grin. "Mr. Forrester, you don't just own a cabin. You own the whole damn valley." But that wasn't even the best part. Her team had been digging too. What they found made my stack of HOA fines look like pocket change. Vivian's HOA wasn't just crooked, it was a machine. A shell company here, a hidden account there. Over $2 million in fees were funneled off into businesses owned by her board members and relatives. Illegal permits rubber-stamped by a county commissioner with suspiciously fat campaign donations. Environmental reports were falsified to push the development through faster. And homeowners, real families, are being squeezed out, fined into foreclosure, then their properties flipped for profit. This wasn't just harassment. This was racketeering, organized fraud, and Vivian Ashworth was at the center of it. Roxanne slid another folder across the desk. These patterns match cases in Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Same woman, same scam. She builds, she bullies, she cashes out. And she thought she could do it here. I leaned forward, tapping the mineral rights page. She built her empire on my land. She thought her scam was airtight. But every secret she buried was about to be dragged into the sunlight. For weeks, I'd been dodging bullets. Now it was my turn to fire. Roxanne filed the first motion that morning, an emergency injunction freezing all HOA activity until the courts reviewed the mineral rights violations. Within hours, their power to fine, threaten, or enforce anything was legally suspended. Then came the letters. Certified copies were sent to every homeowner in the valley, explaining that their property titles were clouded, that their mansions sat on illegally permitted land, that every dime they'd paid to Pine Ridge Estates HOA might have been siphoned into fraud. By sunset, my phone buzzed nonstop. Neighbors, angry, confused, scared. The same people who once glared at me from behind tinted SUV windows were now calling me for answers, and I gave them the truth. With receipts, with copies of the trail cam footage, with the paper trail Roxanne's team had dug up. It didn't take long. A handful of them flipped sides immediately. "We were told you were the problem," one said over the phone, his voice low, ashamed. "Turns out she's the one robbing us blind." I sat on the porch that night, the valley below dotted with lights. But for the first time, I didn't feel outnumbered. The tide had shifted. Vivian wanted me isolated. Instead, she'd given me an army. She thought she'd silenced me. Now every voice in the valley was starting to echo mine. And soon, the feds would be listening too. The first sign came at sunrise. A low thrum that rattled the window panes. Not thunder. Not trucks. Helicopters. By the time I stepped outside, the valley sounded like a war zone. Black SUVs tore up the mountain road. County sheriff cruisers blocked the entrance. And overhead, 2 federal choppers hovered like vultures circling a carcass. Within an hour, Pine Ridge Estates looked less like a luxury neighborhood and more like a crime scene. FBI jackets swarmed driveways. IRS agents carried out boxes. EPA trucks rolled in, ready to test the runoff from lawns that had poisoned the creek. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, as the Queen herself, Vivian Ashworth, was led out of her mansion in handcuffs. Her sunglasses were gone, her perfect smile cracked wide open. She shouted about conspiracies, screamed about persecution, but nobody listened. Reporters swarmed. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The woman who once barked orders at me was now trying to shield her face from the cameras. One agent paused at my gate. "Mr. Forrester?" he asked. I nodded. He tipped his cap. "Thanks for your cooperation. You gave us what we needed." For the first time in months, I felt the weight shift. No more playing defense. No more standing alone. The mountain was mine again. And justice had finally found its way up here. But the sweetest part wasn't watching her get cuffed. The real reckoning was still waiting inside a courtroom. The federal courthouse in Denver smelled like polished wood and nervous sweat. Reporters filled every bench. Neighbors packed the gallery, some still in disbelief that their HOA queen now wore an orange jumpsuit instead of pearls. Vivian Ashworth shuffled in, wrists shackled, her platinum bob dull and streaked with gray. No Range Rover, no clipboard, just a hollow stare that darted around the room like a trapped animal. Judge Williams read the charges with a voice sharp enough to cut glass. Wire fraud, racketeering, tax evasion, environmental crimes, conspiracy. Every word landed like a hammer strike. When the sentence came, the room went silent. 25 years in federal prison, restitution of $69 million, immediate forfeiture of every asset tied to the HOA scam. Vivian jumped to her feet, shouting, "This is persecution! I was protecting property values. Her finger jabbed toward me. "He's the criminal here." The judge didn't flinch. "Mrs. Ashworth, sit down. You turned the dream of home ownership into a weapon. You terrorized families for profit. Today that ends." The bailiff grabbed her arms as she thrashed, her voice cracking into screams. "This isn't over, Forrester. You've ruined everything!" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The echo of the gavel drowned her out. As marshals dragged her away, the courtroom erupted. relief, applause, even tears. Justice, carved into stone right there in front of us. But for me, the true ending wasn't in the courtroom. It was waiting back in the valley, where the mountain finally breathed free again. When I finally drove back up the mountain, the valley didn't feel cursed anymore. The helicopters were gone. The flashing lights had faded. What remained was silence, the good kind. The kind that smells of pine and smoke and feels like home. The cabin stood steady, same as it always had. My mother's chair still faced the window. Only now the view was different. Wildflowers were coming back. Lawns had been torn up, replaced by meadow seed. The creek, once choked with fertilizer, ran clear again. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped by with handshakes and coffee. Some apologized. Others just sat on the porch, quiet, grateful to breathe mountain air without feeling owned. That's when it hit me. This fight was never just about me. It wasn't even about the cabin. It was about legacy, about refusing to let greed bulldoze history, about standing up when the easy thing would have been to walk away. Vivian thought she could buy silence. Instead, she taught an entire valley what happens when people stop bowing and start fighting back. I leaned against the porch rail, watching the morning sun paint the ridges gold. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, the kind that comes from knowing you never gave up. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive.